Hi, it's Steph. Welcome back to our garden. It is now mid-June and the garden is bursting into bloom. This might be my new favorite month in the garden. So come along with me for a mid-June garden tour. Starting here on this bed in one of my front borders, this is what I call my retaining wall bed because it is a wall that comes off of the driveway. The colors in this bed are gorgeous. They're really soft whites, pinks, and purples, and I love them. So right here, I have this beautiful peony that has gotten bigger and bigger every year. It is called Crinkle White, and I do have it staked, but the stems are really sturdy on this variety, and it just has a real airy look to it. It's beautiful. The bees love it. There are always bees in the center. And I really enjoy this one here at the end of this bed. And then as we go down, I have my Olivia Rose Austin. And this is the only English rose that has performed well for me. So this is a David Austin rose. It has a really soft pink coloration. And it goes so well with the Nepeta and Salvias that I have blooming in the front beds at the moment. You can see that it's a real ruffly one. It's actually fragrant. It's just a beautiful rose. It's one of the only English roses that I've tried that haven't been riddled with disease and given me that much trouble. It blooms really well. It's just a good one. I do still get some yellow leaf and black spot, but not nearly as much as some other varieties. The dwarf bachelor's buttons that I grew from seed are still looking lovely and pumping out tons of blooms. So I have left those and I'm going to see how long they can go before the heat really sets in and takes them out. But I have been enjoying these so much. And they were just a pack of fairy morse seeds that I purchased over at Walmart, probably in late winter, and started them indoors in the first week of February. And they have done really well. And even some of the alyssum is holding on. I did pull some of it so that I could plant a couple of annuals across the front. I planted the Berry Blend Lantana, and I'm excited to see how those do in ground. And the Campanella that I started from seed is starting to bloom. This is a biennial. I started them with a winter sowing method for the last couple of years. So in the first year, they work on root development and foliage. And then in year 2, you get these large, really pretty bell-shaped blooms. On the back side of the bed, I also have a really pretty white iris that's blooming. It's one that I had purchased at a garden club plant fair several years ago. It's called White Swirl, and it has the most kind of ethereal look to it. It's really beautiful, and I love it. The blooms are more dainty. They're white with a hint of yellow in the center. And I have been able to divide this clump. I also have it over in my patio bed. It's a real pretty variety, and it just complements the other plants in this bed so nicely. Now, these are for sure plants that you should have in your spring garden. Irises, some roses, some peonies, nepetas, salvia, just all such beautiful workhorse type perennials in the garden. And if you want to grow a 9-bark, but you're short on space, this is an excellent variety. It is the Tiny Wine 9-bark. It's by Proven Winners. It stayed pretty compact in this bed for me over the last several years. And it's a native shrub. Gets these beautiful blooms on these arching stems in the spring. And then it has peeling bark, so it provides winter interest as well. So a couple of great reasons to grow a 9-bark. And you can see that this one, the blooms are just starting to fade. It has a dark red foliage, a really deep kind of red colored foliage. And I really like the way that it provides some contrast in this bed and that it blooms in spring. And I like the way that the branches kind of hang over this retaining wall, just like the Japanese maple that I have behind it. And this gorgeous peony is called Festiva Maxima, and it starts off a really light blush pink before fading to white. And in the center, it is a bit of yellow with almost like a dark fuchsia or red striping. Let me see if I can show you that. See that? You can kind of see it there. But a really gorgeous variety, large blooms, and very fragrant. And this gorgeous iris just started blooming a few days ago, and it's called Poems of Ecstasy. It has a beautiful lavender, kind of iridescent purple on the falls, and a blush pink at the top. It's a real striking one. I have a couple of foxgloves that self-seeded in this bed, and I was so excited to see them pop up. I love foxgloves. They are a quintessential cottage garden flower, but they also look beautiful in perennial borders. Now I'm going to go through the backyard now because the sun is starting to get harsh in some areas, and then we'll make it back around to the front to look at the other borders. But here in this patio bed, I have my firelight tidbits that are all leafed out and looking really beautiful. And then right behind them, you can see I have some alliums that are blooming, and those are the ambassador alliums. They're nice and tall, and they're also later in the spring to come up. So I love the way that they look there. And then you can see I have some dark foliage plant. This is penstemon. It's the onyx and pearls. This is the third season here in my garden. I had bought one plant, divided it in two. Last year they were a little small. This year they're a little bit bigger, and they're starting to bloom. I love the contrast of the dark foliage among all the green in the bed, and that's something I try to do in all of my borders, is mix in some different colored foliage, some different textures for some visual interest. And you can see I have another one of those white swirl iris right behind the penstemon that's in bloom. And in the last tour, I mentioned that I incorporated some annuals along the front of the border and in the bed as well, because I love the way that they provide such a long season of color. So I did start some of the New Look Dusty Miller from seed that I planted along that corner. And then I have some Campfire Marshmallow Bidens planted in between my Sweet Flag Ogon. And then on this end, I planted a drift of the Orchid Purple Sunpatian. And in the bed, I have some of Rocking Playing the Blues Salvia, as well as some Truffula Gomphrena, which I think will look really pretty. I have a delphinium that is starting to bloom, which I'm always surprised when this delphinium returns, because delphiniums are traditionally a difficult plant to get to come back more than a couple of seasons. And my friend Catherine had grown this from seed. She gave me this plant, and it's been happily returning for at least 3 years, maybe even 4 years now. And on the back side of the bed, facing the patio, I have this perennial that I talk about all the time when I do a box store garden center visit, because I love it. I've been growing it in my garden for probably close to 10 years now, and it's a rock star. Now, this is called pincushion flower, or scabiosa. The variety is butterfly blue. And it is a perennial, but a short-lived perennial, which means that it usually returns upwards of 3 years, and then it might not return. But because I like it so much, I've replaced it a few times. It's a pollinator magnet. It blooms nonstop from right now in spring until our first hard frost. And here in my zone, that's usually at the end of October. And there's always tons of buds on it. So if you don't grow this variety, I highly recommend it. It's a great one. And on the back side of the bed, I also have a drift of the Boom Chocolata Hardy Geranium, which is perennial. And I've had it here in my garden. This is their third season. You can see that it has a darker foliage, which makes a really nice contrast to all of the green that I have surrounding it here in this bed. And it almost has like a dark red outer margin on the leaf. Just a really interesting foliage. And then you get these lavender purple blooms. There's actually a couple in bloom here. And I do have some footage of when they were in bloom last year. They were gorgeous. I'll insert that so that you can see what they look like when they're more in bloom. But such a pretty perennial. Some shade feels so nice. We have a little breeze this morning, and it's actually been exceptionally warm for late May and early June here in the Northeast, which I wasn't quite ready for it to get this warm this quick. It's meaning a lot of watering, and things are growing quickly, which is nice, but it also means more weeds to keep after. But you can see that these impatiens that I planted underneath my Dr. Merrill Magnolia are looking beautiful. And in between them, I have that drift of the Let's Dance Skyview Macrophylla hydrangeas that I planted. And I think this is going to look really pretty in this corner. In this bed during the late May tour, we had seen the Nora Barlow and the Black Barlow columbine that was in full bloom, looking gorgeous, but those are now done blooming and starting to form seeds. And I'm going to actually let them form seeds so I can drop a few more in this area so that I can get some more plants, because they do appear to be good self-seeders. And here you can see that I have some more of that Southern Charm Verbascum. This is originally where I had planted this plant. I had bought it over at a church plant sale and then loved it so much. Have been buying seeds to grow it ever since. And I've started it with winter sowing 3 years in a row so that I can spread some more around my garden. And my peony that I have planted in the center of the columbine is now in bloom. This is one of my favorite herbaceous peonies. It is the Sarah Bernhardt. Look at these gorgeous, large, fluffy blooms, and they have the most amazing fragrance. Now, I planted these in this bed maybe 3 seasons ago now. So it did take them a little while to get reestablished and to send me up a good amount of blooms. But this year I'm getting more than I did last year. So that's a good sign. And you can see that there are still quite a few more to open. That one has a little ant on it, feeding on the nectar there. But it's a real pretty one. If you don't grow this one, it's a good one to add to your collection. And here on the side of the shed, I have my quickfire hydrangea, which does beautifully every year. And I can see by looking at the stems that I have a little bit of deer damage on it. You can always tell deer damage because they make a very blunt cut, because all they do is bite it and rip at it. And this is what you end up with. So I do have to remember to spray this one with some deer spray. Sometimes I miss them, and when I do, they know it. Look at that. So good thing I noticed that now. But on this trellis that I have growing along the side of the shed, I have a clematis as well as a climbing rose. And the clematis is currently in bloom, as is the rose. So this beautiful white fluffy clematis is called Duchess of Edinburgh. And I actually bought this in a 2-pack from Costco several years ago. It also came with a blue variety, which doesn't do quite as well as this one, but it's a real pretty one. So much dimension in this bloom. And then the rose that I have here, which is the climber that is thornless, is the Zephrine Drouin. So let's get a different angle so you can see these blooms. Look at this. It must have been a crew that came at this hydrangea because they did quite a number on it. So I am going to spray it immediately after this tour. But here is the Zephrine Drouin climbing rose. You can see it has really pretty, kind of like a bright bubblegum pink, and it is pretty much the same color as my double pink knockout roses that are in full bloom in the front borders that we're going to look at in a few minutes. But this is a real pretty one. Eventually I will get here, prune it and train it correctly onto the shed like I'm hoping. I want it to grow on the wall as well as along the front. I think that could look really beautiful. I'm not going to wait. I'm going to do it right now so that I don't forget. I'm going to use this deer out. I like to alternate between my deer sprays because I think that they get used to the fragrance. This should recover just fine. I'll still get some blooms because these bloom on new wood, but I don't want them to get it again. Coming around to the other side of the shed, I did just also spray these little lime hydrangeas just to make sure they don't strike on these as well. But this hedge is growing in pretty nicely. I will say that the third one there underneath the Katsura Japanese maple is getting quite shaded. So I don't know that I'll get very good blooming from it this year, but this hedge did grow in very nicely. But what is blooming are my lady's mantle. I absolutely love this perennial. Not only does it get these really pretty sprays of chartreuse flowers right now in June that pair beautifully with things like roses and peonies, as well as nepeta, right? What a combination that would be. But they also have really pretty foliage that hold on to rain droplets beautifully. They look like little beads of glass. Now, lady's mantle, also known as Alchemilla mollis, is a really versatile perennial. It can be grown in full sun, and it can also be grown in partial shade, which is where I have it growing here underneath the canopy of these Japanese maples. And it's hardy in USDA growing zones 3 through 8. Now, if you live in a really hot climate, they probably would do better in part shade. If you live in a cooler climate like me in a zone 6B, 7A, you could probably get away with planting it in full sun and it would be really happy, which is why it would make a great companion for peonies and roses because they bloom around the same time. So in cooler climates, you can get away with doing that in full sun. I have a gorgeous peony that I want to show you here in this area, but to get there, let's walk through the Japanese maple garden. So you can see that I have a few of these caramel heucheras planted along the edge here. This is the heuchera that performs the best for me so far. So I have about 6 of them at this point, and I really like the way they look here. I think they contrast nicely, especially with those Japanese painted ferns that came in really nice this year. Now, sometimes the bunnies like to go after them. I have been spraying them, so hopefully that doesn't happen this year. But this butterball that we planted, it's an evergreen conifer, maybe a couple of months ago now, is settling in nicely. I think it was a great addition in this corner. In fact, I'm thinking that next season, I'm going to spin you around slowly, I'm going to plant 2 more of those butterballs right here on either side of this step leading you up to the patio, because these Fire Chief arborvitae that I've had here for a couple of years took quite a beating this year with the winter. We had a terribly cold winter, and I don't think they were happy. Plus the bunnies got to them. They were all nibbled on, and they just haven't recovered. So I'm going to have to dig those up, but I do think that a round conifer in that space would be perfect. And because the butterball has that dwarf or slow growth habit, they would be a great plant to accentuate each corner of those steps. All right, heading back down the path here. So I've been having a lot of fun experimenting with shade plants because I've always gardened in a sunny garden, and that's been a lot of fun. But heading over to the peony that I want to show you. This is the Scrumdiddlyumptious Ito Peony by Isley, and it is an absolute stunner. Look at this coloration. Isn't that gorgeous? I am so happy with this peony. I've been coming out to look at it for the last couple of days because it is just so beautiful. Now, Ito peonies are a cross between an herbaceous peony and a tree peony, which means they're really nice and sturdy. These don't need any staking. They generally get to be 3 to about 3.5 feet tall and wide, and in a nice round habit. They almost look like a shrub, really. And when they're done blooming, you can cut off the blooms and just leave the foliage intact, and they'll just look like a little green foliage shrub. Coming along the back side of my Japanese maple garden, I actually have a Chantilly lace aruncus that's blooming. This is a more compact version of aruncus or goat's beard, and it has these really pretty white plume-like blooms and a ferny-like foliage at the bottom. And in this back woodland border that is pretty weedy at the moment, I have to go through and cut back all of the daffodil foliage, weed it out, and maybe even add a little bit of mulch. This Celestial Shadows dogwood or Summer Gold dogwood, it's one of the two, has this gorgeous variegated foliage of green and yellow. It just finished blooming, so there's still a couple of blooms on it, but you can see that the flowers are huge on this dogwood. And I just love it. I actually bought this as just a white dogwood at the Home Depot, probably 5 or 6 years ago now. And it has grown beautifully, and it has this really unique variegated foliage. So sometimes you find these diamonds in the rough at the garden center in these box stores, and you just never know what you're going to get. And sometimes it works out to be something really beautiful. And right beneath it, I have a ground cover that I absolutely love. It is Lamium, or dead nettle, and this variety is called Purple Dragon, and you can see that it has a beautiful silvery foliage, and it's currently in full bloom with these purple blooms. It makes an excellent ground cover. It's spread itself around in this bed a little bit, which I don't mind at all. And I have another plant that's blooming that I really like, and I'm going to see if I can buy a couple more at the nursery this season because it doesn't divide very well. It's kind of got a deep taproot and it's kind of woody. It's called the Galinia trifoliata or Bowman's root. Really great dry shade plant. It likes dappled sunlight and it's been really happy in this spot. Has a really kind of ethereal white bloom and just looks really pretty. Kind of just floats above your other perennials. And panning over from our Japanese maple garden, we end up at our new well bed. And I probably should come up with a better name for it, but I call it that because it originally started when we placed a faux rock to cover our wellhead, and then we ended up making a planting bed around it. Now this silver plant that you see in the front, when I showed it in the last video, it was closer to the ground. It has since shot up some growth, and I think they're bloom stalks. I'm pretty certain that it's going to bloom. It's a type of Artemisia called wormwood. There might be an actual name to it, but that's the type of plant that it is. But I really like the pop of silver it provides in the front here. But what I want to show you is that some of the iris that I transplanted here from one of those shed beds last fall is actually blooming. And sometimes when you transplant iris, they can take a little while to get reestablished and to send up blooms. But this one is called the Black is Black, and it's a really deep purple. It almost looks like velvet. And right on the side of this wormwood or Artemisia is a new variety of allium that's actually blooming. And you can see that it has more of a pink hint to it than some of the other alliums that I've grown in my garden or that I do grow. This one is called All the Buzz by Proven Winners. It likes full sun, part sun, and it gets to be 14 to 18 inches in height and needs 16 to 20 inch spread. And it blooms mid to late summer. Now these did arrive as trial plants grown in a greenhouse, so they're a little ahead. So I'm guessing that they'll bloom a little bit later next year, but I really like the color on them. And the Nepeta or catmint that I have growing in this bed is also blooming. Now this is the Cat's Meow variety. I had received it in bare root form. I had it in my raised bed garden for a couple of seasons to put on a little bit of size. And when we created this bed last season, I went ahead and planted them here, and they're looking lovely. I have a group of 4 on this side, and I have 2 more on the other side. Such a great bloomer for the late May, June garden, and it is deer resistant, rabbit resistant, because they don't like their minty fragrance, which I actually find quite pleasant. And they have these really pretty lavender purple blooms that complement other plants so nicely. They pair perfectly with roses and peonies, and they bloom for a really long time. Even after you deadhead them, you get more flushes throughout the season. And my Bartzella peony has bloomed. Now this is one that we transplanted last fall, so I wasn't sure that I would get any blooms out of it, but I'm happy to report that the one bud that it had gave me this beautiful light yellow flower. It does have a little bit of a red inside the center of the petals, but it is gorgeous. And the penstemon is also blooming here in the backyard. The Midnight Masquerade penstemon has a really pretty dark foliage, just like the one in the front yard. The Southern Charm verbascum is also looking lovely. So this one's been going for a few weeks now. I love it. It is gorgeous. It did get a little beat up by the wind. You can see that it's kind of flopping a tiny bit at this point. But if I did put up something like a peony ring at the base when it starts emerging in the spring, I think that would help keep it nice and upright. In general, it's pretty strong. You can see that it's sort of adjusted to the wind and it's starting to kind of curve upward, but such a beautiful plant. And I also just noticed that this Lychnis that we bought during that rare plant sale that we went to a few weeks ago is blooming, and it has this really pretty kind of soft apricot coloration to it. And I'm actually going to let it finish blooming. There's a couple more buds left on it, and hopefully let it dry out so that I can collect seed to try winter sowing. This is the Lychnis carnea. It's a pink Maltese cross, large clusters of varied florets from salmon to pink, and it's hardy in zones 4 through 10 and gets to be 3 to 4 feet tall, and it wants sun. Now this corner of the bed is a little bit more shaded, and so I think I'm going to dig it up when it's done blooming and plant it in my pollinator bed, or that new bed that I have that I've been redoing right in front of my raised bed garden. I think it'll look really pretty there. The ginger wine 9 bark that I planted here on the hillside is also looking lovely. Look at this shrub. It has the most beautiful red foliage with a hint of orange, and these clusters of blooms in the spring, and the weight of the blooms causes the branches to arch and gives it a really beautiful shape. It's native, and the bark peels in winter, so multi-season interest. It's a really good one. It does get quite large, so this one is one that needs some space. I want to say it gets somewhere in the 8-foot tall and wide range, maybe even a little bit bigger, but it is such a beauty. We've made our way around to the front of the house, and in this front border, there are a couple of things that are blooming. You can see in the back there, I have a baptisia. That is the Decadence Lemonade, and it's a really pretty variety. And it's right beside the Engelmann's Bush's Lace spruce that we planted last season to replace that Colorado blue spruce that we had to have taken down. And I thought that I was going to have to move this baptisia because there wasn't going to be enough room for the two of them. But for now, it still fits in that space quite nicely, and the blooms are gorgeous. This Decadence Lemonade baptisia is such a beauty. You can see that it has a coloration of a very pale yellow and almost like a mauvey pink. Just really pretty. And then the foliage is, of course, beautiful. It has kind of like a bluish tint to it. It makes great cut flower fillers. So when you make arrangements with your zinnias or your dahlias in the summertime, you could use the baptisia or false indigo foliage as a filler. And a few more pretty things blooming in this bed. Now this salvia, my May night variety, has been going for a few weeks now. Such a great garden perennial, provides vertical interest. The deer and rabbit leave it alone. Pairs so nicely with so many other perennials, and it reflushes after you deadhead it. So after this first initial flush of blooms, I'll go through, cut all the stems down, and I'll get more blooms out of it. And it will continue to do that throughout the season. Never as prolific as the first flush, but you will continue to get blooms. And then this phlox is also really pretty. It is the Fashionably Early Crystal. Has a very gorgeous kind of light white color with a faint pink in the center. But I will tell you that this variety, at least here in my garden, gets pretty bad powdery mildew. So I did remove some plants that were kind of crowding it here in this area to improve the airflow, which I'm hoping will prevent some of that from happening this season. But time will tell. I'll let you know how that goes. And then I also have my yarrow or achillea. This is the Firefly Peach Sky that is getting ready to bloom. It's all budded up. Has that pretty ferny foliage. And then I have some summer drummer alliums that you can see here kind of floating on these thin wiry stems that are also going to bloom soon. They're summer blooming alliums. They're a little bit smaller. They look like a drumstick, hence the name. And then my penstemon that I had a huge stand of here in the front of this bed is a bit smaller this year. And so I looked it up, and it seems as though penstemon is a shorter lived perennial, usually returning really well for anywhere from 3 to 5 years before starting to decline. Now you can divide it to see if you can improve that and to reinvigorate the plant. So I might have to do that this fall, but it's still blooming and looking pretty. I just wish I had more of it because it has looked so gorgeous in prior years with this huge bunch of blooms that I had here in the center of this bed. It's a really pretty variety, has a darker foliage, these lavender pink bell-shaped blooms that the pollinators absolutely love. And it moves nicely in the wind, just a really pretty one. And the Semfalls spirea that had beautiful spring color just a few weeks ago is now pushing out all of its blooms, and the color has turned more green. So it looks like it has a fern-like foliage. So it's a really interesting shrub. And the pollinators absolutely love the blooms. They initially look like a cluster of little tiny white pearls, and then they get kind of fuzzy and plume-like. So a really interesting shrub. I planted some tall annual vinca across the front of this border that I had started from seed, and I have my first bloom. It's a really pretty shade of pink. So I'm hoping that these work out, because if they do, I'm going to grow them again next year, because vinca are drought tolerant. They can handle a lot of sun and a lot of neglect. So they would make a great annual for a border. And in my main walkway border, I have my knockout roses that are currently the star of the show. Now in this corner here, you can see the lupin is still going. I did deadhead some of the spent blooms. I also have a really pretty variety of delphinium. This is a newer introduction by Proven Winners. I was sent this small 1-quart size sample plant last season, and it has gotten huge. Now we did have a really windy day yesterday, so it's kind of leaning. It got a little bit hit by the wind, but other than that, it's got such a large, gorgeous bloom. Look at this. It's called Violets Are Blue. So pretty. Full of buds. Such a prolific bloomer for only being in its second season and grown from a quart-sized plant. So that is really impressive, and it is just gorgeous. So I'm glad to have it. I'm hoping I can divide it, but I'm afraid to mess with delphiniums because they're not always a long-term perennial. But if you haven't tried this variety, it should be new in garden centers this year. So I wouldn't forget, while I was out here, I went ahead and grabbed one of my half circle plant stakes to offer this delphinium a little bit of support. These are actually perfect for these medium height perennials that need just a little bit of help to stand up straight and not lean. And I think that's gonna work out perfectly. The violets are blue delphiniums are hardy in zones 3 through 7, and they get to be about 30 to 36 inches in height. So they're the perfect size for the second row of a border, which is exactly what I have it doing here in this corner. And some more beautiful foxgloves that have self-seeded and grown themselves in these beds for the last several years. I absolutely love them. So I let them go. If I see the foliage at the bottom, I actually have a few more seedlings growing back there, among some weeds, of course. But I just pull out the weeds, leave the foxgloves, and after a while, you'll get more discerning and you'll know which foliage belongs to which plants. So you're able to leave those in place and let them grow on. But such a beautiful, tall plant, kind of just moves gracefully in the wind above all of the other plants, and I absolutely love them. So if you want your foxgloves to self-seed, all you have to do is just leave these seed pods on the plant to dry out, and then as they ripen, they will start to crack open, drop those hundreds of seeds, and you'll end up with more than enough foxglove seedlings. I do weed some out, but I leave quite a bit behind. And the star of the show, my knockout roses. Now, these are glorious in June. They will bloom, however, all season long, from June all the way through October when we get our first hard frost. So they are a continuously blooming rose, a lot more than any other rose that I've tried in my garden. They also are pretty disease and pest resistant. Nothing seems to bother them. Sometimes they get sawfly larvae at this point in the season. So far, so good. I don't want to jinx it, but look how many blooms on these roses. I have 4 shrubs going along my walkway here. And the one at the top is the largest because it's how the sun goes, right? So it's sunniest up here and then it gets progressively shadier down the bed. So they get a little bit smaller as you go down. I didn't even prune and fertilize these this year. That's how great these are. So low fuss. They're a landscape shrub rose. On average, they get to be about 4 by 4 in height and in width, and they're hardy in zones 5 through 11. And all roses want to be grown the same way, in full sun and in a well-draining soil. So this is what the leaves will look like if you have sawflies that are feeding on the leaves, but you can see that there are plenty of good leaves on this shrub, so it hasn't been that bad this year. Some years it's worse than others. And even though it makes the leaves look unsightly, it doesn't harm the plant. It still blooms a ton. It just makes the foliage not look so great. But these shrubs are tough as nails. They push out new foliage all season long. So within a few weeks, it doesn't even look like anything happened. So they rebound super easily. These dwarf bachelor's buttons that I started from seed over the winter have been absolute rock stars this spring. They're gorgeous. They're nice and compact, so they don't flop. So sturdy and upright, so many different colors. So I have this beautiful shade of blue, some purple, some white, and even some pink. And they were just from a pack of seeds that I picked up over at Walmart for less than $2. And they look gorgeous. I'm not going to pull them out. I'm going to let them go as long as they want to, but I have gone ahead and planted my gomphrena in the front here, as well as some blueberry swirl phlox that I grew in containers last year. It's a trailing phlox, and my thought is that if it does well, maybe it'll trail over the edge of this walkway, and it'll provide some purple color once the nepeta and the salvia slow down. And the candy corn spirea is starting to bloom. You can see that the buds are now opening up. And this is what the flowers look like. Really pretty shade of pink. And even the foliage is absolutely gorgeous on this spirea. And last year with winter sowing, I started some yarrow, the summer pastels variety, which is perennial. And it's going to bloom for the first time this year. You can see this one is all budded up. And it looks like the blooms are going to be a shade of pink based on that bud there. Now this was a mix, so I had no idea what the colors would turn out. And I was hoping that they would be soft colors, shades of pink, because that's what my color scheme is out here, pinks and purples. But look at that, a really soft shade of pink. Very pretty. So I have these 2 clumps here, and I also have 4 more in my other border. If you asked me what my favorite month in the garden is, I would have to say June. And it's not because the roses look beautiful, because they do, but it's because everything is still pretty fresh and not tired. By July, while my garden does have a riot of color in July, it's gorgeous with so many of the plants that I have over in my backyard. It does start to get a little tired and hot. Everything is parched and thirsty. And by the time you get to August, it's really hard to have a beautiful garden. But let me know what your favorite month in the garden is. And what are your thoughts on knockout roses? I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And whenever I think about changing them out for something else, I just remember what they look like right now. And I quickly change my mind because I love them. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.